right, we are just about ready to go. I'm still having some technical difficulties yet, and sometime I'll get them straightened out. I thought I had everything, but it's too complicated. All right, this is a series of talks called AstroDynamics. And literally, AstroDynamics means moving stars or something to that effect. Things change. Even the most stable stars and galaxies change. We're studying how humans change in relationship to the stellar environment, which is itself changing. We have taken only a very few elementary steps. What we are doing particularly is looking at some of the tools and techniques developed by astrologers over the ages to understand this. We have just finished a subsection on transits, which are the simplest and most commonly used astrodynamic tool. Transits are the relationship of the natal horoscope to the current astrological conditions, to the present, as things are now. As with all things astrological, dynamics relates back to the natal horoscope. The natal horoscope is a statement of character of the native for this lifetime, at least if one believes in rebirth. Since I do work under the hypothesis of rebirth, the information will be presented from that point of view. I also follow a hypothesis of an evolutionary creation. And each of these rebirths that are being taken as givens or assumptions are part of a much larger evolution, so that we can understand one lifetime really well, but that isn't to know the whole of a person's evolution, which is over many lifetimes. Evolution is a very slow process. So this is so because everything works toward perfection. One writer put it, nature works from one state of perfection to another. But perfection is a very slow and demanding thing. So that's the way evolution is. Now, another reason for the slowness is because awakening to consciousness and deepening that awakening is very slow and very hard. I've worked for many years now on deepening my consciousness and being more aware of reality, and I've made progress, but it's very, very slow. We do get moments where we have awakening and things seem to come to us in a flash, but what has led up to those moments of a flash is glacially slow. Now, in the materialistic scientific view of evolution, changes in evolution take place slowly, and they are all building off of the past. There is no intended future. It's just a matter of responding to the present conditions by building off of the past. The environment that we as humans and that the earth has undergone, and all the living beings on it, has changed quite a bit over the eons of the Earth's existence. There was a time, hundreds of millions of years ago, that the whole Earth was just about completely covered with ice. There have been times when life forms have been forced to change, which is similar to the way that materialistic evolution sees it. When their conditions are extreme in their changes, everything has to evolve, whether it's coming from a materialistic or a spiritual point of view. In all of this, it's wonderful that life never gives up. It just keeps on developing new forms to deal with the new conditions. Now, if we review our lives, we see that progress has been very slow. I've been in this body 84 years now, and when I look back on my life, I have mixed feelings. On one hand, I'm much more conscious of things than I was in my earlier years. I'm also more cautious, but I haven't lost optimism. So this raised consciousness, or more expanded consciousness, is a mixed blessing. I have gratitude for the clarity and the facility that comes with changed consciousness. But when I look back, I'm somewhat ashamed at the little that I have evolved and at the puniness of my application. I realize that there's much more that has to be done, and it's going to require a lot of work. And I'm sort of liking that. I've gotten to like work more than anything else. All right. What we've been speaking of in the last few minutes is our character as we understand it right now. If we look at our physical character, we look in the mirror. And if we look at our attitudes and how they've changed, that's character. But it's shallow character. It's surface character. It is consciousness in our waking consciousness as it stands right here and right now. The reality is that there is a much deeper and more complete character. It's as if we have a wall and we poke a finger through it. The finger is what we see, and we don't realize that there's much more to us on the other side of the wall. With our state of being as it is now, there's an awful lot that we're not aware of, that we're not conscious of. If one has one momentary waking spiritual experience, we are astounded by the grandeur of our own being. Not the shallow part that we are egoistic about, but the divine part of our being. Most people are not strong enough psychologically to take more than just a moment of something like that. Some are not ready for it at all. We have other limitations beside being psychologically weak. There's just simple limitations. There are very few people like Leonardo da Vinci. He was a scientist, he was an artist, he was a mystic of some accomplishment, he was even a grand, strong physical person. Not very many people are like Leonardo da Vinci. Some of us have some talents, everybody seems to have some talent, and we all have problems. So we can work on them, and we work on them because of our limitations. Now eventually we're all going to be like Leonardo and more. But for now, we have to work piecemeal. So we can see that in terms of destiny and the character that it is an expression of, there's only so much we can do. If we're developing something new in our character, it may take several lifetimes to do that. And we have to set other things aside to do that. We work piecemeal. When we looked at the transits, we tried to understand the basic ripe character indicated by the natal horoscope. It interacts and reacts with the environment, but even that is rather small. Now, when we study astrology, we hope to help ourselves and others by becoming more aware of our situation or their situation and the means to get the most out of it and to waste the least amount of experience. Now, when we looked at transits, we looked at very specific times. We looked at the times when outer planets either conjoined or opposed natal planets. Those are the times when the conditions of the environment are most obvious and they're so strong that something has to be done about them. They are also times and conditions that are likely to be critical and to indicate specific qualities or traits that we have. There are also times when we can know ourselves better. In critical moments, we find out whether we're a fight or flight person, or we understand a lot of things about ourselves. Now, the CIA and the National Security Administration, they have people who are psychological profilers. And the profilers try to understand the behavior of various people of interest to the United States and to understand them well enough that in a given situation they would understand how the individual would react. It might be important if there's a world crisis or something like that. Some people might get rattled. Something like that was what we were trying to do with transits. We were trying to see what things came out of a person relative to a condition outside. We were trying to profile people in such a way. We put more emphasis on the events, but that's all right. Now, provided it doesn't become too much of a trivial game, this is a good way to learn about transits. Horoscopes of famous people are readily available. You can get them online for just about anybody you want to think of. And their events or the reactions are available in the newspapers and on the internet and places like that. And we can see what transits produce, what kinds of circumstances and attitudes and actions on their part. We're being little mini profilers. It's a good way to learn. But if you do this, please remember that all people are worthy of respect. It's easy to pass judgment or to make commentary about a person's behavior that you may or may not like, but every individual needs respect. It's also when we have knowledge, we're responsible for our knowledge. And it's probably important that we have positive thoughts about the people that we may be observing and learning through. Some astrologers say a prayer for the people that they're studying. Now, when I look back at the subsection on transits, it seems to me that too much emphasis was placed on events and very short little periods of time. We did a little bit with Uranus, showing that over a 7-year period, Uranus stays in a sign, and we tried to get the mood of that period, but we didn't do enough of that. I hope that you can take up where I left off. Now, a lot of people don't have time to be studying horoscopes of politicians or celebrities or sports figures or historical figures of one kind or another. Most people are going to be dealing with people that they are intimate, family, people that they work with, things like that. This is what you want. You want to develop a track history of how they have responded under past transits. All right, now we're going to move on, or begin to move in the direction of the next tool that we're going to use for studying forecasting and prediction. We're going to be studying what is called secondary progression. However, so with me there's always a however. Before doing that, it seems wise to proceed doing that with a very basic question about destiny and time, past, present, and future. Again, we're going to be using the hypothesis of rebirth and of a spiritual evolutionary creation, so they're going to be assumed. Now, a horoscope, which is for the beginning of a rebirth, can be viewed two ways. It can be viewed like the two-faced Janus. Janus was a Roman god who had two faces. One looked forward and one looked back. Janus was a god of time. January is named after him, and so we have New Year at the beginning of a new year at January. And when the new year comes, we look back and we look forward. We see where we were successful and where we failed, and we resolve to do new things or better things. Now, if one looks back at a horoscope, one way in looking back at the back-facing Janus is to view the horoscope as the sum total of all of the destiny from the past. But it would be more accurate to state it with one word added. It represents the sum total of ripe destiny of the past. There is much more destiny that we have than we can express. Just as we were saying earlier, there's much more to our being than the part that is manifest in this life or that we are consciously aware of. Our destiny is like that. Destiny is made up of things from the past. Causes ripen into consequences. And the ripening is like some fruits. Some ripen faster, some ripen others. And this is true for things in time and in space. In our interactions with each other. In space, it used to be at one time when we were at conflict with someone, it was a face-to-face conflict. Now, if we have a conflict, we lob intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we don't even, unless we have devices sensitive to their presence, we don't know what is really going on. And we could be alive one day and out of the body the next, within a moment. Now, that's a pretty obvious spatial example. Time is more complicated. It takes more time for some causes to ripen than others. For example, we can think of something right in this life. Think of one of those persons that seeks vengeance. They might hatch a plan of vengeance for 20, 30 years in order to do it. That's their scheme. Some ideas and some parts of character take many millennia to mature. But we have this one moment at the beginning of the horoscope which has elements from the immediate past, and some of them are part of the long sweep in the evolutionary creation. We're limited. We're not Leonardos. There's only so much we can do. We can't do everything, even though we feel we could or would like to, but we can't do it, maybe in the future. So if we want to have balanced development, and balance is necessary to move forward in anything, we have to set some things aside so that we can bring other things up to par and then go forward. So we may need to redirect a cause so it doesn't become some immediate horrible circumstance. Suppose, for example, someone injures another person and keeps them from doing something that they were just about to accomplish. Further, suppose that this perpetration occurred when there wasn't time to make restitution. Many things in destiny is not like there's a mandatory sentence or something like that. If we make mistakes, we can make restitution and we can move forward creatively. This sets up a destiny situation that cannot be solved in this life. And it brings us to an awareness of, in a simple way, three kinds of destiny. The first kind of destiny is called pay-as-you-go destiny. You do something, you get immediate feedback. A child says its first word or takes its first step and it gets all kinds of immediate feedback. If you step on the head of a rake or a hole and get bopped in the head, that's immediate feedback also. I do that every now and then. I did it just last week. I was in the tool shed and I didn't watch where I was stepping, and I stepped on the head of a hole and bang, I got it in the head. Likely when the moon was passing over my Saturn and Aries, but that's neither here nor there. Pay-as-you-go destiny is usually associated with activity in cardinal signs. Sometimes it's associated especially with Mars. Now, returning to the example of having done harm to someone and being unable to make it up in a lifetime, in the next lifetime you're often given a chance to make it up to that person again, even if you don't recognize that you had this association from the past. There are some people that you have the opportunity to serve that you don't really know why. And then you can make it up to them by serving them. If you can recognize that and you have this inner intuitive impulse, I really want to help this person, you can do that. That's called vicarious destiny. Like your own destiny is advanced or your own character flaws are worked out by serving someone else. And that kind of destiny, vicarious destiny, is usually associated with common signs, which some call the mutable signs. The problem with that kind of destiny is that sometimes the consciousness that is associated with common signs is not a stick-to-itness. They're amazingly deft and adaptable and quick about things, but there isn't any tendency to stay with something and keep working with it. So, sometimes if we don't make it up to someone and we still have this lingering association with them, we're born with the third kind of destiny, which is fixed sign destiny. It's destiny that you have to experience, and there's no getting away from it. Try as you might, it's going to be there. Fixed destiny is associated with fixed signs, and sometimes with Saturn, and sometimes with Pluto. Now, when we see things like this, we can see that destiny ripening is not a simple, straightforward activity. If you think about it, every one of your thoughts puts something into the atmosphere. And a number of thoughts of a given type are going to have consequences. So it's not easy to figure out destiny. This is again an example of why all progress is slow. Mystics find that destiny is a manifest expression of character. What we are manifests as our destiny. Character is distilled experience. We experience things and we learn from them and they become part of us. Now the essence of experience that becomes character is in mysticism called soul. It is someone who is soulful, is someone who has extracted the essence of experience and has built it into their character. And in this, very, very gradually, we become what we are now. A person who has done diligently and has worked very hard on this is a person of high character. They know from experience and intuition the moral nature of reality, and they have responded to that, and they create within that. So our character is what we become, and what our character is becomes our destiny. Now, there's something about this that has to be considered. If character is a product of experience, this means that it is cumulative, that it is residual. Little by little, we build a distinct character, and our character becomes more and more clearly defined. Some people, you see them, you know, their character is strong. It's clearly defined. Other people sort of, it's hard to put them into focus. Even the unregenerate parts of our experience or our behavior get cooked down, and they become virtues eventually. And as virtues, they are outcroppings of our character. So we have, as humans and human-like beings, we've been at this for a long time. We've been at it for eons. So, as we evolve and individuate, our character becomes more and more distinct. It becomes more substantial. There isn't really a right word to say. It's not more like a block of granite or something like that, because soul substance can't be weighed by the pound or anything like that. But there is something solid about a person of character. Now, it's important to be aware of the magnitude of character in an individual. Otherwise, we will have illusions or delusions about that. it's relatively easy to change the shape and the size of an anthill. It's much more difficult to do the same thing with a mountain. Now, because character development is cumulative, it means that the stronger the character, the more difficult it is to change. A complete makeover of character, that is to become a totally different person, is just not possible. Different facets of a character can be expressed from life to life, and sometimes within one life, but to be someone else, that's just not possible. Even trying to modify behavior and how character is expressed takes intense and persistent application. To want to become a better person, it takes a lot of application. You're going to fall on your face a lot of times, at least I have. Now, it's possible, anything is possible to the spirit, but it doesn't mean that we're going to suddenly become angels overnight. Now, seeing this is true, we see some of the problems of modification when we're looking at a horoscope. Because we want to keep this in mind if we want to help foster progress in other people. People come to us and ask us for advice, or say, some of them will say, what do the stars say? You want to help them. It requires a deep and thorough sense of judgment to understand the strength of the residual character and the individuation that the person is trying to accomplish. It depends on how much soul power the person has. Some people don't have enough soul power that they can carry out the changing or modification of character. If someone, two people can have the same horoscope, and one of them have a lot of character and one of them doesn't. So this requires an understanding, because the way you want to interact with a person who has a lot of character is going to be different than the person who doesn't. And it's a very difficult thing. There's things you can, if you read all sorts of astrology books, they'll say this means this, and this means that, and this means that. It maybe did for some people, but you have a person in front of you that is trying to understand and make something of their life. You want to know whether it is possible, whether they have the strength of character or not. This is why we have to even be able to do this with ourselves. We have to know ourselves well enough to know whether we are just a pattern or whether we really have character. At Delphi, the inscription that was chiseled into stone, that was indicated for all initiates, know thyself. This is our duty. It is our duty to know ourselves and to understand what can and cannot be changed in us. All right, this is a little bit about the back face of Janus. Now we want to look at the front side. The things that we've looked at we keep them in mind. When we start looking at a horoscope and trying to understand the horoscope as the sum total of the past that is ripe, these are things you want to keep in mind. It's important because we have to have clear understanding if we want to help people. All right, now let's look a little bit at the front face of Janus. This can be short tonight. I doubt that'll even go in an hour. I think 45 minutes might be all that there is. I wanted to break it in such a way that I didn't want these kinds of talks are not pleasant to a lot of people, so I wanted to break it up into two pieces. if we're looking at the front side of Janus, facing front toward the future, it's important that we know that our future is not an extension of the past. If it were, we would just be programmed automatons, and we would just be led through something that we had no freedom in it. Even the freedom that we think we have, it would be an illusion. The evolutionary creation in which we're participating is not a determinism. And it's extremely important to keep this in mind as we study astrology. The reason is that the more we study astrology, the more we are inclined toward think in deterministic terms. We usually study the people that we interact with regularly, family, friends, work associates, and we study them. And when we do that, we find that in many things, they are predictable. We can be like the profilers. We can predict what they're going to do in a given situation. Even without astrology, spouses know what the other one is going to do given a certain circumstance. The more a person studies astrology, the more one is inclined toward determinism. When we find people are predictable, we find out there are more things that we find about them that are predictable. Some things seem, no, that's just happening. But when we study more and more, we get to know that more and more of it is a result of determined behavior. Patterns, habits, ground in outlooks about life. Now, the tendency to determinism is especially pronounced in astrologers. And even more so, it is especially with astrologers who spend an enormous amount of time studying mathematical astrology, trying to exactly predict the time and place of events. That attitude is a danger. It's a danger to evolutionary process. We see that most people do have a habitual attitude. That's not wrong, not at all wrong, but we have to be aware of it and use of it. You know, if we try to establish good habits in our children. When a child has good habits, it can go through all kinds of trying times and come off very well because it has good habits. Now, if we tend to look at habitual behaviors, we tend to rigidify them more. Sometimes when you're working with a person's horoscope and you're talking to that person, you want to not refortify behaviors that that a person is all too well aware of. That's a pretty strong set. So if we tell people, oh, you're doing that thing again, you're making it more likely for it to happen yet again. And if we are predicting events and those predictions are accurate and pinpoint, we're even more fostering an attitude of determinism. Some astrologers will not make any kind of predictions because they don't want to be part of having that come to pass. You can talk to a person and you can say to them, well, this kind of behavior has this kind of outlook, or you can say that this taking place in your life will have this kind of circumstance, but if you start pointing out their behaviors and their the past pattern, you see that that you're helping them to continue on in that same way. We're responsible for what we do. And predicting is one of those things that we have to be careful of. I don't think astrology should even be studied unless we have a firm belief in freedom. If a person is not free to do something about what they find, they then feel trapped in an astrological deterministic situation and they can't do anything. So, we've come to talking about freedom. And the attitude about freedom is also something that has to be tempered. Even a little study of a life or of creation in general, we see that some things were not so free to change. At least not so free to change as we are now. And it's one of those things, you can do damage to a person by encouraging them to change something that they're not ready to change, and they try it and they are unsuccessful, and it fosters defeatism in them. We don't want to do that sort of thing. There are also laws of nature, which are practically inviolable. And then there is a principle of cause and consequence. It's pretty hard to institute a cause that's not going to have a consequence. We can't deny these things. Now, intuitively, we see the truth and beauty of cause and consequence because through it people learn. That's where we get the experience which becomes distilled into character. The whole world wouldn't make sense if there wasn't a relationship between cause and consequence. It's a big consciousness expander to take and understand everything that happens to us individually and to the world at large is a consequence. And when you get the understanding of the creativity that produced that kind of consequence, it is really a big mind-opening situation. So, we're now talking about a balance between freedom and determinism in human activities. And we're seeing that both freedom and determinism can be benign. For example, rearing a child is benign determinism. We bring children through certain circumstances, and sometimes they resist and they don't like it at all, but by exercising good judgment and bringing them through circumstances, it's for their betterment. Of course, again, the balance between freedom and determinism, which in an individual, it varies from person to person. Some people need more freedom, some people need more determinism. That's what we were trying to talk about earlier when we were talking about 3 different grades of destiny. Now, if we want to help people using astrology, we have to determine how free they are. We have to look at that forward-looking face of Janus. To my knowledge, there is no astrological technique by which we can tell how free an individual is. There isn't such a technique. If you look at Uranus, you can see that a person might be on a quest for freedom, but that doesn't necessarily mean how free they are. Though I have known astrologers that by reflecting off Uranus is the way they came to understanding freedom in the individual. If there were an indicator of freedom, then even freedom would be astrologically determined, which is an absurdity. So the way of finding freedom is the work that an astrologer does when he or she begins to work with a horoscope. You set up a rapport with the person, with the native. In this sense, the native includes the degree of freedom. What I'm trying to say is, you work with someone, you develop a rapport, and you can sense how free they are, or how rigid they are, or how lackadaisical they are. It's a matter of observation, but observation also with intuition. You can't succeed in astrology without intuition. Degree of intuition is comparative to the success in astrology. There are some astrologers that think astrology is only rational, that there is no intuition involved with it at all. You can't do astrology without intuition. It's too big. There are too many possibilities. Now, I'm not very advanced in astrological technique. What we're doing in these talks is only the simplest and the easiest things about astrodynamics. I live and die by intuition. And fortunately, sometimes the intuition is there, and I can help. Now, though it seems so sometimes, intuition doesn't just happen. Some people are clearly more intuitive than others. But that is not a matter of choice. Chance, I should say, is not a matter of chance. You can develop intuition. And there are several things that help you to develop intuition. In the first place, having faith that what speaks inside of you, having faith in that and trusting that. A big part of intuition is trusting the truth as it manifests within you. Early on in the process, you say to yourself, that can't possibly be true. And I've had a lot of those moments where that couldn't possibly be true. And then you start working with somebody, and that was what was true. And there are also spiritual exercises that one can practice to strengthen intuition. Basically, a life of service prepares one for that. But anytime you sacrifice for the sake of others in a highly rational way, you're going to become more intuitive. I have plenty of talks on the internet on spiritual exercises relative to intuition and other things, so you can find them on the website. And if not, there are always questions. I think on the philosophy side, there's going to be a cosmogony talk this coming, the third Thursday of this month. But in August, the third Thursday is going to be dedicated to questions again. All right, back on the topic of finding freedom in the native. And this brings us to the very basic fundamentals of astrology. Astrology is based on 3 pillars. And the first of them we've already been discussing. It's intuition. We know astrology is a vehicle for intuition. A second pillar is observation. observe as much about the native as is possible and try to align that observation with intuition. You can look over your observations that you're making about someone and being open to what does that mean, and then the intuition gives you an answer. So this includes asking a lot of questions about someone. If you're working with a horoscope, you want to ask as many questions as possible. It's only foolish, the people that try to blow people's minds or amaze them by making statements about their character without interacting with them. And that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is to help people. Now, if we align the observations with the intuition, that makes it science. And this astrology is a science, after all. And the third pillar of astrology is judgment. Stepping back and pondering it with good judgment. Sometimes we have an intuition and we misinterpret it. The intuition itself may be true, but our interpretation is wrong or illusory. It's like those things in Shakespeare, the woods is coming from one place to another, and the guy says, the forests don't move, therefore I'm safe. It's a misinterpretation. Sometimes observation is misinterpreted or misleading. And if we are biased, we can actually fudge the facts in what we choose to observe. So that's, we come to wrong conclusions then. With wrong conclusions, we make errors. So judgment, if we judge the intuitions or our interpretation of the intuitions, and if we judge the way we are working with observation, it's the best way to come to knowledge. All right, we have one little tiny topic, and that is freedom. Freedom is not once for all. Freedom is something that one grows into. Some people define freedom as a talent at life. That if a person has that talent, they are free no matter what the circumstances of life may be. One of the first degrees of freedom, it's one of the first degrees that you look for if you're working with a native, is knowledge. Life is so much better if we're not in the dark. And if we don't even have to know what the reason is, but to know that there's a reason why we are experiencing these things, that's enough for some people. So one of the first services as astrologers that we can offer is knowledge. If someone comes to us and wants to work on a circumstance in their life, we can work on bringing them knowledge about what is it, what's involved astrologically. A more advanced degree of freedom is choice. In the United States, we say we're free because we can elect to elect our representatives. Corresponding service of astrology is to present the options to a person so that they can elect or freely choose what they want to do. The astrologer doesn't tell somebody what to do. The astrologer presents different options, and so the person can elect according with knowledge and with the freedom of choice. It's important to encourage people to the fact that they can make choices. Because a lot of people, have you ever seen any of those videos of a animal a very wild animal like a tiger or something like that, that's been in a cage all of its life, and suddenly they let it out, they open the cage up, and it doesn't even leave the cage because it doesn't know freedom. And sometimes people are like that, you know, especially if they come from a very strong religious background. They don't feel that they have the freedom of choice, and sometimes it's an important thing to encourage people to make choices for themselves. A still more advanced degree of freedom is creation. If one knows what the options are in front of them and realizes the stuff that they're working with, they can create. That is where progress comes. This is what makes our evolution not just a matter of going from cause to consequence, which becomes a new cause and a new consequence. When things come to us and we can creatively take the essence of what is in the experience and transform it into something else, that is creative destiny. That is a very high degree of freedom. Creative freedom is not merely in an artistic studio. Yes, you're free, you got so many paints and you're free to do whatever you want with them. That's a wonderful thing, but that's not creative living. That is an introduction to creativity, to know the stuff of character, to know astrologically what is in the air, and find a way to make something beautiful of it. It's exceedingly hard to do if you're dealing with somebody where, you know, everything is dismal and you're dealing with someone who has hatred or something like that. But you can creatively deal with it. We don't have to retaliate. We don't have to do things of that nature. I'm getting too preachy. It's time for things to end. One thing about this is you can't create for someone else. If someone comes to you, you can give them the materials that they have to create with, but they have to create with them on their own. You can't do it because then you would be an agent of determination, and both people would suffer from something like that. So those are degrees of freedom, and that's the little that we have to say about the forward-facing face of Janus. Next time we're going to work into the technique of secondary progressions and might even start working with them. If you have questions, please send them in. And if you have comments, please send them in, like, this is too much philosophy and not enough astrology. That kind of comment is sometimes called for. Thank you very much. This turns out to be almost exactly an hour.